Okay, good morning, everybody. Happy Friday. It's Marika Walsh in Ottawa, and I'll be moderating the press conference with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and Minister of Housing, Diversity and Inclusion, Ahmed Hussen. We'll start with opening remarks from the Prime Minister and Minister Hussen, and then turn to questions. So far, there are no questions in the room, so it looks like we will have 25 minutes for questions from the phone. But first, we'll begin with opening remarks, starting with Mr. Trudeau. Thank you.
Thank you, Marika. Je suis très heureux d'être ici aujourd'hui avec le ministre Hussen pour parler de logement sécuritaire et abordable. Every Canadian deserves a roof over their head. Since 2015, as a federal government, we re-engaged and we made historic investments in housing. But over the past 2 years, we've seen the pandemic increase the need for affordable housing, particularly amongst Canada's most vulnerable. That's why, working closely with municipalities and provinces and territories, we launched the Rapid Housing Initiative and invested $2.5 billion. We're now on track to create more than 10,000 new affordable units, exceeding initial targets. These new homes will support those who need it most, and it's a significant step towards the goal of eliminating chronic homelessness. L'initiative pour la création rapide de logements a été créée pour aider les gens en situation d'itinérance ou à risque de le devenir. Plus d'un tiers des 10 000 nouveaux logements sera dédié aux femmes et aux enfants les plus vulnérables. Par exemple, on sait que pendant cette pandémie, la violence conjugale a eu une montée très troublante. C'est pour ça en partie pour ça qu'on a l'emphase là-dessus. Et plus de 40% des logements vont soutenir les membres des communautés autochtones. Ce qui est bon sur le programme de logement rapide, c'est que ça prend des mois, pas des années, pour créer des logements qui vont répondre à la demande immédiate des gens. Par exemple, l'été dernier, j'ai visité le projet Hope Living à Kanata, qu'on voit dans la photo derrière moi, qui convertissait son rez-de-chaussée en logement pour les aînés et les membres des communautés autochtones. On a aussi d'autres projets à travers le pays où des municipalités ont acheté des hôtels ou des bâtisses commerciaux pour les convertir en logements rapides et urgents. C'est un programme qui fonctionne, qui va continuer de fonctionner. Because one of the most transformative things a government can do is invest in housing. Because with a roof over their head, people can build a better life. En terminant, je veux vous dire qu'on continue de suivre la situation en Ukraine de très près. On a des discussions avec leur gouvernement et avec nos alliés sur comment on peut soutenir les Ukrainiens. C'est pourquoi aujourd'hui, on peut faire une annonce. Le Canada va fournir un prêt de jusqu'à 120 millions de dollars au gouvernement de l'Ukraine. Canada will be providing a loan of up to $120 million to the government of Ukraine. Russia is aiming to destabilize Ukraine, including economically. This loan will help support Ukraine's economic resilience. Minister Joly discussed it during her visit, and we're also exploring other options to provide financial and other supports. I want to thank Minister Sajjan for his hard work to secure this financial assistance for Ukraine. And again, Canada calls on Russia to de-escalate and engage in meaningful dialogue. As we go into the weekend, I want to give a few words on last week's terrible hostage situation at Congregation Beth Israel in Texas. For Jewish families across the country, Shabbat begins this evening, and I know it'll be on their minds as they gather with their loved ones and in their congregations. I want to be very clear. Violence against Jewish communities is anti-Semitism and is always unacceptable. We will continue to stand against anti-Semitism and all forms of hate and extremism. And I send all my thoughts to families who are celebrating Shabbat tonight and reflecting on those terrible events of 1 week ago. Merci. Et je cède maintenant la parole au ministre Hussen. Ahmed.
Thank you so much, Prime Minister. Hello, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. Thank you, Prime Minister, for that introduction and for all that you've done to ensure that folks here in Ottawa and across the country have access to a safe and affordable place to call home. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm joining you from Ottawa on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabeg peoples. Partout au pays, l'accès à un chez-soi sûr et abordable est une priorité pour de nombreux Canadiens. Having a roof over your head, Prime Minister, as you've indicated, is something many of us take for granted, but we have to make sure, as you've said, that our most vulnerable are not left behind. And let's face it, the pandemic has made things worse for the most vulnerable members of our society. Nous ne cessons de demander aux Canadiens de rester chez eux pour protéger leurs proches, mais qu'en est-il de ceux qui n'avaient pas de chez soi pour commencer? We had to act quickly and safely to get shovels in the ground and people into homes. Nous avons mis au défi nos fournisseurs de logements et nos partenaires municipaux de nous aider à créer ces unités rapidement. And that's why today's news of creating over 10,000 new permanent affordable housing units through the Rapid Housing Initiative is simply historic, especially given that we just introduced this program just over a year ago. And that's 10,000 mothers, children, seniors, persons with disabilities, youth, and others that won't have to worry about finding shelter in these difficult times. Many units are also designated for women and children fleeing domestic violence and Indigenous peoples experiencing or at risk of experiencing homelessness. And on top of that, this Rapid Housing Initiative is also supporting thousands of good, well-paying jobs when they're needed the most. C'est donc une bonne nouvelle pour nos communautés, pour nos travailleurs, et pour notre économie. And that's the National Housing Strategy at work. And before I conclude, I'd like to make one final comment. Today, we celebrate and recognize Lincoln Alexander. Today is Lincoln Alexander Day, which is a time to honor and recognize the significant contributions of Canada's first Black Member of Parliament, Cabinet Minister, and Lieutenant Governor of Ontario. Throughout his life, Link, as he loved to be called, exemplified what it meant to be of service to others, becoming a really passionate advocate for equality of Black Canadians and the advancement of education and youth issues. And it feels really fitting to be making this important announcement with you, Prime Minister, on this day, as Lincoln Alexander was known for his commitment to serving his community and country and looking out for the most vulnerable in our society. And next month marks the beginning of Black History Month. This year's theme is February and Forever, celebrating Black history today and every day, because Black history simply can't be summed up in a month. J'ai donc hâte de célébrer chaque jour les Canadiens noirs et les riches contributions qu'ils apportent à notre pays. And with that, I turn the floor over to you, Prime Minister. Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much for everything that you do.
We can start the press conference now, Marika. We can turn to questions.
Great, thank you so much. As there are no questions in the room, we'll turn to the phone lines for 25 minutes of questions. Over to you, Maud. Thank you.
Thank you. Merci. Please press star 1 at this time. If you have a question, veuillez appuyer sur étoile 1 maintenant pour poser une question. Our first question is from Annie Bergeron-Oliver from CTV National News. Please go ahead. À vous la parole.
Hello, thank you for taking our questions. This is for the Prime Minister. Yesterday, the Russian ambassador to Canada spoke to CTV News, and he scoffed at the idea of sanctions, saying that nobody cares about Western sanctions because they don't work and don't pose a threat. If Russia isn't concerned about sanctions, do you think the West needs to do more than just threaten economic harm to avoid an invasion in Ukraine?
We have actually seen over the past number of years that the sanctions that Canada and other countries have brought forward on Russia for its unacceptable incursion into Crimea and its continued interference in the sovereign affairs of Ukraine have had an impact on Russia, have had an impact on the Russian people. We know that the Russian people do not want to see Ukraine invaded, do not want to see deaths in a conflict that should be avoided. That's why we're calling on Russia to de-escalate calling on diplomatic conversations, but reminding everyone that we stand with the Ukrainian people, with their ability to choose their path forward for their country and thrive in the ways that they get to pick democratically.
Thank you for that. And my follow-up is also on Ukraine. There are new reports today that Canada is sending defensive equipment to boost Ukraine's military capabilities. What exactly is Canada sending, and how quickly will this assistance arrive?
We continue to lead an Operation Unifier, which is a training mission that Canadian Armed Forces have been engaged in for a number of years now, that I got to visit personally in Western Ukraine a number of years ago when I was in the region. We have always been a friend to Ukraine. We will always be there with the necessary supports, and we look to continue to do that. Today, we're making a significant announcement of $120 million loan, which is one of the top things that the Ukrainian government has been asking for from Canada. The conversations that our foreign minister had with Ukrainian officials, including the Ukrainian president, stressed that, and we're happy to be there to reinforce the resilience and the strength of Ukraine's economy faced with Russian destabilization, including economic destabilization.
Thank you. Merci. Notre prochaine question est de Raymond Fignon de TVA. À vous la parole. Please go ahead.
Merci. Bonjour, M. le Premier ministre. J'aimerais vous parler d'un autre type de logement, le 24 Sussex, parce que la Commission de la capitale nationale, hier, s'est dite inquiète, préoccupée, réclame une décision parce que l'immeuble se désintègre. Elle a soumis plusieurs propositions au gouvernement ces dernières années. Alors, est-ce qu'une décision s'en vient et sinon, pourquoi?
Les conversations continuent. On sait très bien que malheureusement, 24 Sussex a été délaissé par plusieurs générations de politiciens et de premiers ministres au fil des années. Malheureusement, est dans un état extrêmement piètre. C'est un édifice historique qui a une certaine importance, mais il y a aussi des préoccupations profondes au niveau de la salubrité, mais aussi au niveau de la sécurité du premier ministre et de sa famille, de futurs premiers ministres. Alors, nous sommes en train, évidemment, de consulter, de regarder les différentes possibilités pour 24 Sussex, et quand on aura des décisions, on va vous les partager.
Est-ce que vous comptez prendre une décision dans ce mandat-ci, ou vous craignez plutôt d'être critiqué si vous choisissez de rénover la maison du premier ministre qui est le poste que vous occupez?
Je pense que c'est très clair et je l'ai déjà dit. La résidence actuelle dans laquelle moi et ma famille se trouvent est tout à fait adéquate. J'ai aucune intention de vivre à 24 Sussex, quelle que soit la longueur de mon mandat ou mes mandats en tant que premier ministre. Mais effectivement, ça prend une réflexion sur l'avenir de la résidence du premier ministre, et nous sommes en train d'être engagés avec la Commission de la capitale nationale, mais aussi avec des experts sur les différentes options pour assurer la sécurité, la stabilité et aussi le bien des premiers ministres futurs et de l'intérêt du peuple canadien.
Merci. Our next question is from Mike Lecouteur from Global News. Please go ahead. À vous la parole.
Good morning, Prime Minister. Thank you again for taking our questions. I know you talked about other options that you're considering to send to Ukraine, but I wanted to know, what is the line for Canada to send weapons and or lethal aid to Ukraine? Is it a minor incursion? Is it tanks rolling over the border, or is it, them going into Kyiv?
We've been very clear that we support Ukrainian people. We support the territorial integrity of Ukraine. That's why we condemned, alongside the international community, the illegal annexation by Russia of the Crimea and their continued interference in the Donbass region of eastern Ukraine. We consider that the territorial integrality of Ukraine is important to be respected, and any movement of Russian troops into Ukraine will be absolutely unacceptable and met with a clear response from the international community.
Just in my follow-up, I'd like to know if you could actually address about weapons, but what I also wanted to ask following up is, over the last couple of days, there's been an attempt to define what is an incursion into Ukraine territory and what would constitute an invasion. Strong words and sanctions didn't stop that annexation that you were talking about in Crimea in 2014. So what is Canada's red line now, and what makes you think that Putin will take the West more seriously now than he did in 2014?
We have been engaged in significant diplomatic efforts as a global community and been very, very clear that it is not in the interests of Ukrainian people, it's not in the interests of the Russian people to see a conflict in which Russians and Ukrainian soldiers are killing each other, in which civilians are affected. Any incursion of Russian troops onto Ukrainian territory will be viewed as continued escalation and absolutely unacceptable, and the international community will respond strongly. As I've said a number of times, we continue to look for a range of different ways to support Ukraine. The announcement of $120 million in a loan to the Ukrainian government is one of the top things that they asked for. But we are, of course, looking to do more, and we will have more to say as the situation unfolds.
Thank you. Merci. Notre prochaine question nous vient de Louis Blouin de Radio-Canada. À vous la parole. Please go ahead.
Bonjour, M. Trudeau. Est-ce que le prêt que vous accordez aujourd'hui signifie que vous renoncez à l'envoi de matériel militaire et des armes à court terme?
Non, au contraire, Louis. On est en train de démontrer qu'on est là pour aider le gouvernement de l'Ukraine et le peuple ukrainien avec ce qu'ils ont besoin. Une des premières demandes les plus importantes qu'ils avaient pour nous, c'était pour de l'aide financière, et on a pu annoncer aujourd'hui cette intention de faire un prêt de jusqu'à 120 millions de dollars pour le gouvernement de l'Ukraine. Mais on sait qu'il y a d'autres choses dont ils ont besoin. On est en train de regarder qu'est-ce qu'on peut faire plus et comment on peut encore plus aider, et on va sûrement avoir d'autres choses à dire dans les jours et les semaines à venir.
D'accord. Alors, je comprends que vous ne renoncez pas à l'envoi de matériel militaire et des armes. J'aimerais traiter d'un autre sujet avec vous, si vous voulez bien. J'aimerais avoir votre réaction au drame au Manitoba. Ces 4 personnes qui sont mortes de froid en essayant de traverser la frontière. Est-ce qu'il faudrait renforcer des patrouilles à la frontière, d'après vous? Est-ce qu'il faut sévir contre les passeurs? Qu'est-ce que vous en pensez?
Écoutez, ça a été une histoire absolument ahurissante. C'était tellement, tellement tragique de voir une famille périr comme ça, victime de trafiqueurs humains, victime de mésinformation et de gens qui ont pris avantage de leur désir de bâtir un monde meilleur. C'est pour ça que nous faisons tout ce que nous pouvons pour décourager les gens d'essayer de traverser la frontière de façon irrégulière ou illicite. Nous savons qu'il y a des grands risques à ce niveau-là. Et c'est pour ça que, d'ailleurs, il y a des patrouilles régulières pour essayer d'interdire et d'appuyer des gens qui prennent ces risques inacceptables. Évidemment, nous travaillons très proche avec le gouvernement américain sur les enjeux frontaliers, et nous allons continuer de travailler pour s'assurer que les gens ne choisissent pas la migration irrégulière à leur risque et à risque de tout notre système d'immigration aussi.
Thank you. The following question is from Tom Perry from CBC News. Please go ahead. À vous la parole.
Hello, thanks for taking our questions. Prime Minister, can I ask you this loan? How is a loan going to deter Russia from invading Ukraine?
Well, thanks, Tom. One of the things that we're seeing Russia do right now is not just amass troops along Ukraine's borders, not just engage in cyber attacks and propaganda to destabilize, but actually engaged in economic destabilization as well. And one of the things that Ukrainian government has been clear is having additional financial resources to shore up their economy will be extremely important in terms of reassuring the Ukrainian people and standing strong against these Russian destabilizations. That's why we are there to support the government of Ukraine with $120 million as a loan. But there is, of course, more we are looking to do, and we will continue to work with them on that.
And just as a follow-up, I know that Canada is working with its allies to apply diplomatic pressure on Moscow. Has Canada, though, made any diplomatic overtures of its own to Russia to try to persuade Moscow not to invade Ukraine?
We have been unequivocal for many, many years now on the unacceptability, the illegality of a Russian incursion into Ukraine, whether it was in Crimea or in the Donbass, and its support for Russian separatists in that area, whether it's the accumulation of troops that they have on Ukraine's borders, or whether it's the attempts to interfere in the political processes in Russia. Canada has consistently expressed its concerns directly to President Putin and to Russian officials. And we are among the countries with the strongest regimes of sanctions in defense of Ukraine. We will continue to make very clear our concerns and our desire to see de-escalation of the situation and continue to use all means necessary to impress upon Russia the need to step down from their aggression.
Okay, I hope we have time for 2 more questions. If we keep questions and answers short, we will be able to fit in 2 more people. Thank you.
Thank you. Notre prochaine question est de Mylène Crête de la Presse. À vous la parole, please go ahead.
Bonjour, Monsieur Trudeau. J'aimerais savoir à quoi vont servir spécifiquement, est-ce que vous pouvez nous donner des détails, à quoi vont servir les 120 millions de dollars là, que vous donnez à l'Ukraine pour soutenir son économie? Que vous prêtez, c'est-à-dire.
C'est un programme qu'on a au niveau de Développement International Canada qui est là pour répondre et pour appuyer des pays qui qualifient pour des prêts souverains comme cela. Il y a des critères assez détaillés pour pouvoir offrir ces prêts-là, mais certainement, étant donné la situation avec la déstabilisation économique agressive que la Russie est en train de prendre contre l'Ukraine, contre le gouvernement de l'Ukraine, contre le peuple ukrainien, cet argent va être important pour aider le gouvernement à créer de la résilience à l'intérieur de l'Ukraine. Nous allons continuer de travailler avec eux pour protéger l'intégrité de l'Ukraine.
En deuxième question, j'aimerais savoir, vous avez dit que ça faisait partie des 5 choses que l'Ukraine avait demandées. Quelles sont les 4 autres choses que le gouvernement ukrainien a demandées au Canada?
Excusez-moi, je pense que vous m'avez mal entendu. J'ai pas listé 5 choses. Il y a plusieurs choses que le gouvernement ukrainien a demandé. Vous en connaissez plusieurs et nous, on va continuer d'être là pour veiller à répondre dans la mesure du possible aux besoins de l'Ukraine parce qu'on va toujours rester amis et alliés de l'Ukraine et appuyer le peuple ukrainien dans leur désir de choisir leur avenir sans interférence par la Russie ou d'autres.
Okay, this will be the last question.
Thank you. Our last question is from Tonda McCharles from the Toronto Stars. Please go ahead. À vous la parole.
Thanks. Good morning. Prime Minister, on Ukraine, I'd like to understand, you say that you're looking at all other options. You're prepared even to send military assistance, further military assistance. But I've heard Joe Biden say that U.S. troops on the ground are not on the table here. I haven't heard you say specifically that about Canadian troops in any other capacity other than training. So how do you assess the likelihood that Canada could be drawn into a larger conflict that will require Canadian troops? And how do you think Canadians will view that?
Obviously, we are looking very, very carefully at all the different options and scenarios. It is extremely disconcerting to see the buildup of Russian troops, to see Russian aggression, Russian cyber attacks, Russian economic destabilization of Ukraine. This is something that nobody in Europe or around the world wants to see right now, and we are using all tools to try and encourage Russia to de-escalate, to solve this diplomatically, to not proceed at an engagement, an invasion, a further invasion of Ukraine territory. That's why we continue to stand strongly diplomatically in sanctions, but why we also continue to have Canadian troops in Ukraine as part of Operation Unifier to continue to ensure that the Ukrainian military is able to stand strongly in any incursion or invasion by Russian forces.
So I haven't heard you say that all tools and all options precludes further commitment of Canadian troops in any other capacity. Can you just be clear on that? Are you prepared today, as the U.S. has been, to say Canadian troops would not go into conflict in an offensive capacity to support Ukraine?
I'm not going to engage in hypotheticals. I'm going to continue to say what I have said, is that we are looking to support the people of Ukraine in the challenges they're facing against an aggressive Russia that has amassed troops at the borders, that is interfering in Ukrainian political affairs, that is using cyber attacks and propaganda to destabilize Ukraine. Canada has been and will continue to be a friend and ally of Ukraine, and we will continue to be there to support them and to ensure that Ukrainian people get to determine their futures, not Vladimir Putin.
Okay, that's all the time we have for our press conference today. Thank you so much to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and to Minister Ahmed Hussen and to